Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this webinar, the first of 5 that we're running as part of a series to support woodland creation. We've selected the topics for the webinars based on the need, requests from our partners and stakeholders and farmers and landowners that we've been working with over the last 2 or 3 years. So this first webinar is going to be based on the grant funding available for woodland creation, and I will go through shortly what we're going to cover. But I want to, before I introduce the speakers as well, I just want to go through a little bit of the housekeeping. So we are sort of requesting that everybody keeps muted and the cameras are off during the presentations, as we've got so many attendees. At the top of your screens, you should see a Q&A button. So if you do have questions throughout, please do post your questions in the Q&A chat. We will be tackling those at the end. We may have limited time to be able to answer all of the Q&As. So if there is a particular question that somebody has posted that you think you would really like to hear the answer to, please do like, and we'll aim to answer those questions with the most likes at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing all of the resources at the end. After the webinar, we'll be sending around a copy of the slides, and we'll be sharing links as well as we go through the webinar. So our speakers today is myself. I'm a land use advisor. I'm covering part of the southwest. I've been working with farmers and landowners on making land use decisions for several decades now, not only with the Forest Commission, but with all the organisations as well. My colleague, Neil Duffield, who is one of our field managers, he will be unpicking the grant detail. Neil is one of our field managers who oversees the approval of woodland creation planning grants and the England Creation Woodland Offer, UCO, and these are more sort of the more complex and larger schemes that Neil oversees. And then really privileged to welcome Ellen Smith, who is one of our guest speakers from the Woodland Trust, who is one of the outreach advisors for them. So she's going to be chatting a little bit about the Woodland Trust offers. Also in the background, we have Rebecca Naylor, who's our area marketing communications manager, and also Millie Bell, who's our engagement officer. Though we have got speakers, both Becca and Millie have put in a huge amount of work to make this webinar happen. They will also both be coordinating the questions at the end of the webinar. So moving on, so the what we're going to cover today, I'm going to give a bit of a background to the importance of the trees, on why we need to plant trees today. Neil is then going to cover, as I've mentioned before, the detail about the grants available. I'm then going to cover a little bit about other funding options, and then Ellen is going to chat about the Woodland Trust offer. So before we kind of get into the more meaty stuff, I'd like to go through who the Forest Commission are. People get very confused. We don't make it easy for people to understand. But the Forest Commission is the umbrella organisation, and it's made up of 3 parts: Forest Services, Forestry England, and Forest Research. Forest Services is what I'm a part of, and Forest Services are responsible for all the regulatory functions of the Forest Commission. And that not only includes woodland creation grants, but it also includes woodland management grants, felling licences, and also plant house grants. Forestry England actually manage the nation's forests that you might see out and about. The one down here in the southwest that people are most familiar with is Howden Forest, which is extensively open to the public, but you may see others wherever you are based. We then have Forestry Research. They operate across the whole of the UK, not just England. And they underpin everything that Forest Services and Forestry England do. They are the research, the science behind all the decisions that we make in Forestry England and Forest Services. So a really important part, but we don't often talk about them in the work that we do. So I want to give a little bit of background about the state of our current woodlands and what the woodland cover is at the minute and how we've actually got to this point. So in Europe, they stack up 46% of land area with woodland compared to us, which is 13.5% in the UK. This has slightly increased over the last year. We were at about 13% in the UK, but with the tree planting that we've done to date, we've managed to increase this to 13.5%. England alone, we're at about 10%. In the southwest, we nudge a little bit ahead of this, which were about 12%, a little bit greener than most places in England. So how did we get to this point of sort of 13.5% in the UK? So since Neolithic times, we have been chopping down our forests to make way for agriculture, to use the wood for buildings, for infrastructure, and to use the wood for fuel. In 1086, we recorded in the Domesday Book that our woodland cover had been declined to about 15%. And since then, to the 1900s, the woodland cover dropped to its lowest point in the 1900s to about 5%. With the World War I, we weren't able to import timber because of the war, so the remaining woodlands were decimated because we needed the wood for the war. However, in 1919, the Forest Commission was then formed because it was recognised that we needed to expand our woodlands. And since 1919, our woodlands have been slowly creeping back up with various efforts along the way. But we still need to do more. It's very sobering. I want to kind of chat about why. We hear about it all the time in the news that we need to plant trees, but I want to give it a little bit more of the background of why we need to do that. And it's really sobering. We are reaching tipping points with our climate, and we're reaching tipping points with our biodiversity loss. I hear every day on the news very sobering consequences of climate change, from wildfires to the escalating melting of the ice caps. And we're seeing those effects. It's not happening just to those people overseas and other places. We are starting to feel those effects of climate change ourselves. Certainly the last few years, temperatures have been huge, and the amount of rain that we've all experienced, including today in Devon, has been horrendous. I think the evidence suggests that with every degree of warming, we will experience a 7% increase in moisture in the atmosphere. So we are going to expect even wetter winters and autumns and drier summers and springs. So we need to adapt. We need to adapt to the changing climate. The biodiversity picture doesn't look much better. In this State of Nature report in 2023, there's a 19% decline on average of species across the UK. Some of the more startling statistics of wildflowers we have lost 54%. They've declined by 54% across the UK, and they are essential for our pollinators and for our food production. So it is with this in mind that the government set out its 25-year environment plan, which included trees, included that we needed to reach net zero by 2050, and we need to increase our woodland cover to 16.5% by 2050. And it's because trees are amazing organisms, and they can sequester carbon and they can create new habitats for biodiversity. So they are part, not completely the whole solution, but they are part of the solution to helping slow down climate change and increase that biodiversity. However, I hear so many times from people I work with to landowners and farmers that we need to focus on food production, and I'm not interested in planting trees. We then have a longer conversation about the longer term benefits of trees for farms to make them more resilient, because it's not just climate change or biodiversity they can help with many areas on farms. I've got a list up here. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the key ones where farms can get benefits of trees. So I'm just going to pick out a few of them. We haven't got long today, so I wanted to pick out a few just to chat a bit more about them. So one of the key benefits of trees is the increased shade and shelter. And as I've already mentioned, we're increasing temperatures, we're increasing wet, windy weather, and that has an adverse effect on productivity of our livestock and our crops. Planted in the right place, those trees can offer shelter for animals and increase their productivity in the hot weather or in those windy, wet conditions. Improved water quality. All our rivers in England have failed for water quality purposes through a whole host of different reasons, but planted in the right place, trees can actually filter out the pollutants, stop sediments and runoff going into those rivers. They can offer cooling as well, which is essential for biodiversity in watercourses. Improved air quality. This is great. By planting trees around slurry lagoons, stocking sheds, it can drastically reduce ammonia emissions. Another target that we've set out to reduce in the UK because it's so damaging to wildlife. Reduce flooding. Flooding has massive impact on all of us. Planted in the right place again. Trees have the ability to slow the flows, but also the very nature of their roots allows the water to drain down into the soil instead of across the soil, which means there's more water available for crops, for grass, for grassland, and importantly, any nutrients on the soil, fertilizers, inputs that you've put on are not washed off, and you're not losing those precious resources into the watercourses. There are many. You're more than welcome to pick up some time with us if you want to find out a little bit more about these benefits and how you can utilize them on your farm. But there's even more benefits to trees. So it's a really good option for any areas of unproductive land you might have, whether it's wet, whether it's unfarmable, or if it's scrubbing over. It's a really good option for planting trees. We're not allowed to plant on grade 1, grade 2 agricultural land because it is recognised that we do need to look after the most productive parts of the land. It can be more economical, and it's much easier to manage a woodland than any other land use. And also, ultimately, it can leave a lasting legacy. But there's even more benefits. I've talked about a lot of the indirect benefits of trees, but there's direct financial benefits of trees. By planting trees, you could have a legacy of timber and wood fuel for the future. You can generate carbon units by all the carbon that your trees will be locking up. And you can either keep those carbon units for yourself, or you could sell them on to a third party. And carbon unit price of them is increasing and is probably only set to increase further as we reach 2030. Also, there's massive opportunities for recreation as well, from camping, from courses. That you could also run in your woodland. Other people who have planted woodlands that I know have diversified and have set up great circular economies, even from the venison from the deer that they've been controlling as well in their woodlands. So why are trees so great? Who doesn't love a tree? It's because trees can do it all. So from the very nature of them, the very structure of them, their roots, their branches, their leaves, the very processes that they're undertaking, the absorption, transpiration, and also photosynthesis, means that we can get all of these benefits, the ones I've talked about for the land, but also for climate change and for biodiversity. So to get these benefits, we need to make sure that we're choosing the right tree and planting in the right place, and also for the right reason. So to go through a bit of a background of where that comes from, we have something called the UK Forest Standards, which hopefully some of you may have come across already. If you haven't, I'll just give a little bit of background to it. So back in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, quite a long time ago now, the governments around the world pledged to look after the woodlands much better and in a much more sustainable way. So we went away as the UK and we put together the very first edition in 1998 of the UK Forest Standards. And it takes everything into account from biodiversity, climate change, historic environment, landscape, people, soil and water. So we're managing the woodlands with all of these things in mind, or creating new woodlands with these things in mind. There's things in there that you have to do as mandatory, and then there's also guidance in the standards, and I think it's even shorter than some of the old CS agricultural manuals, so it's a good read and available, and I think Millie's kindly put it in the chat as well. So we had our latest edition, the 5th edition, was released in October 2023. So quickly, just to go through before I hand over to Neil, to go through what a definition of a woodland is. So we recognise, Forestry Commission, a woodland as something that's 0.5 of a hectare, minimum width of 20 metres and potential canopy cover of at least 20%. And what we mean, what 20% looks like, that on average is about 100 trees per hectare. That will give a canopy cover of about 20%, depending on what tree species you select. So a couple of just little pictures at the bottom. So the picture on the left, it would definitely form newly planted woodland, would definitely form woodland on that density planting. However, the line of the trees on the right, that wouldn't be classed as woodland. But there's a great link that you'll get when you get the slides, which will go into this in a lot more detail. So I'm now going to hand over to Neil, and who's going to take us through the detail of the grants. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Jo. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
Thank you very much. Yes, so thanks, Jo. So I'm Neil Duffield. I'm Woodland Creation Field Manager in the southwest of England for the Commission. The two key areas that our Woodland Creation team work on within the Southwest, the Woodland Creation Planning Grant and the England Woodland Creation Offer. Sorry. And I'm just going to introduce those two grants now and go into a little bit more detail. So firstly, the England Woodland Creation Offer. This is the Forestry Commission's flagship grant for woodland creation. It was brought in about 3.5 years ago. In the Southwest alone, we've offered around 2,000 hectares so far under the Woodland Creation Offer, and it is increasing year by year. So as woodland creation becomes more and more popular within the UK once again, we are seeing greater uptake of the grant as well. This grant is for your sort of real delivery of your woodland creation scheme. I'll come on to the planning grant in a bit, and that's more for the planning side, but yeah, this is for the delivery side. And it supports a wide range of landowners to create a wide range of woodlands, depending on what your aims might be. So it has multiple objectives under UCO, and as Joe mentioned, there's so many benefits that come with woodland. And what we try and do with UCO is, or through the design of it, is to try and maximise these objectives so that each woodland is delivering these objectives in some part. But depending on what your aims are as a landowner, it might be that you decide to focus more towards wildlife aspect, or it might be more towards productivity aspect, for example. But some objectives that can come out are the biodiversity and wildlife side of it, in terms of providing new habitat. You can realise new income for your land holding, either in the short or long term. You might be able to improve the productivity of your land holding. You're diversifying your land business, and also sometimes the aim of more of sort of a landscaping point of view to change the look of how a landscape might look. So the basics for the Woodland Creation Offer. So the application requirements: the land must be fully in England and free of existing grant funding and planning requirements at the point of when we can offer an agreement. It's available to farmers, landowners and public bodies. We do allow joint multi-owner landowner applications. In fact, we almost encourage these as we end up with a larger block of woodland created. It supports the creation of a range of woodland types, as long as they're meeting the UK Forestry standard that Joe touched on above. The way it's been designed is to enable private investment to be brought into the site as well. So this can be compatibility with carbon schemes, compatibility with things like biodiversity net gain. Applications are open year round, so there's no window, although we do try and encourage people to put in their applications by sort of May, June, within a year, to be able to get an agreement through for planting the following winter. But the applications are open all year round, and it is always best to hit us at the quieter time in sort of early spring. The overall application size has to be a minimum of 1 hectare. There's no maximum, and our largest schemes in the Southwest are now touching about 140 hectares for a standalone UCO. Individual blocks can be a minimum of 0.1 hectares, and the minimum width has to be 20 metres to be able to comply with the definition of woodland that Joe mentioned above. We do have a little bit of flexibility here for going down to 10 metres if it can be shown that a shelter belt or riparian zone sort of has benefits for these narrow woodland stretches. So I'm going to go into more detail on these on the following slides, but essentially the UCO funding has 4 categories. So initially there's the capital items. So this is it's aimed to give 100% funding for the cost that you would experience for planting trees. So it directly funds the individual trees, fencing and gates, things like ground preparation, and then bespoke items for your site. It could be things like woody dam construction. The second sort of element of UCO is infrastructure support, and this could be for creating recreational or woodland management tracks and infrastructure. The third area is additional contributions, which are essentially top-up payments to try and achieve some key environmental or public outcomes for your site. And then the last element is the maintenance payments. So this is an ongoing payment for 15 years of your agreement to essentially make sure the woodland establishes within that time. So under the first category of UCO capital items, or we sometimes call them standard costs. So this is the support for essentially getting the trees in the ground and protecting them and doing any preparation you need to get those trees growing as well as possible. So it tends to be standalone item costs. For example, there we've got £1.72 for supply and plant a tree with a garden cane. If we're planting at the standard of sort of 1,600 stems a hectare, then that would bring in around £3,000 a hectare for that item alone. As mentioned, these costs are that should be, was aimed to be 100% of the average cost for that item within England. So hopefully that £1.72 should match what it costs you to buy and plant that tree. There is regional variations, and we know that things like the deer fencing mentioned there, £10.27 a metre, sometimes falls a little bit short, but it's also one of the most looted grants on the market to actually provide the funding for you to get woodland onto your landholding. And hopefully we've thought of everything that needs to happen to actually go into your capital items to be able to get trees growing on the ground. We do cap the value of capital items that you can have on your site at £10,200 a hectare. Typically, we find UCO grants coming at around £6,000 to £7,000 a hectare, but for the smaller sites, particularly where they're fenced, then often we are sort of getting near to this cap. But hopefully that is still a good contribution to getting woodland established on your site. So the second element of UCO is the infrastructure payments, and this is basically in place to try and encourage some really good quality access to be rolled out across wider woodlands. So the first option we have is recreational infrastructure, and this is for putting in public access. We have things like all ability paths, steps, ramps, benches, and this payment covers 100% of the cost based on quotes that you would submit at the point of application to fund that recreational infrastructure on your site. We do cap that cost at the equivalent of 10% of the capital items in the UCO. So if the rest of your capital items equals £100,000, we can only fund up to £10,000 for recreational infrastructure. But that still can go quite a long way to getting paths on a site which aren't there already. The second sort of option is for more productive sites, so for woodland management infrastructure. So this is typically a lot heavier duty tracks, roads, drainage that's required to support future forestry and woodland management machinery. The cost of this is only 40% compared to the 100% under recreational, because it comes with that productive element. The idea is that we're sort of facilitating you to be able to get that machinery on in the future, but you will then be bringing out hopefully quite a lot of finance from your woodland. So therefore this is a contribution to that. And equally, this is also capped at 10% of your overall capital cost. The third part of UCO is the additional contributions. So these are payments that you get for your site for any environmental and public benefits that the planting a new woodland will bring. I'll go on to the individual categories in a moment, but it's capped at, sorry, it's not capped at, you can get up to £12,700 a hectare if you're able to sort of meet the requirements and you're eligible for all the different additional contributions that are available. The eligibility is based firstly on location, so it depends on whether you're in certain geographic areas as to whether you actually firstly are eligible for these. And if you are eligible, you also have to meet some design criteria to make sure we sort of getting the most value for money for these payments. So they're very much optional. If you decide not to take them up, it might mean you're then more flexible to create, let's say, a productive scheme. But if you do take them up, yes, there are some design restrictions, but you are incentivized with the payments that come with them. And they are stackable up to this £12,700 top. The payment for additional contributions is a lump sum payment, which is made when the capital works are completed. So you have 3 years to undertake your capital works. So typically by years 2 and 3 of your UCO agreement, most people have completed the capital works and are able to claim additional contributions in one lump sum. You then move on to your maintenance payments for the rest of the UCO agreement of 15 years. So these are the 6 additional contributions that are on offer under UCO. So firstly, we have nature recovery. So this is in 3 tiers. So premium, higher and medium. The different tiers depend on your proximity to woodlands. So the premium payment of £3,300 a hectare is if your site is adjacent to an ancient woodland. The idea here is that we're incentivizing planting adjacent to an ancient woodland to expand the benefits of that woodland and also protect and buffer it. The higher payment of £2,800 a hectare, this is located next to woodlands which aren't ancient woodlands. And then the median payment of £1,100 a hectare is your wider landscape. So typically we're 50 metres away from any woodland. We're into that sort of more open landscape, and they're essentially woodlands that aren't connected. But because you're meeting the criteria of nature recovery, there is still some benefit there for wildlife. The next additional contribution that's on offer is keeping rivers cool. And this is on certain grades of river where it's identified that by planting sections of that river up, we're going to be reducing the temperature of the water in the river, which has a benefit for both fish spawning and invertebrate life. That's sort of the key focus of it. We also know that riparian habitats are one of the most valuable parts in the landscape for a lot of species, and therefore if you can get this sort of additional contribution and the design of a riparian buffer on your scheme, it really did its bang for the buck for wildlife. So that's £2,500 a hectare. The next 2, water quality and flood risk, these are quite broadly spread right across England, so a lot of schemes are eligible for these. So the first one is all about improving the water quality locally within watercourses, primarily through reducing agricultural runoff. So where we have water bodies that are failing from a quality point of view, this £500 a hectare is the incentive to plant woodland to try and address this issue. The next one under flood risk management is where catchments are under heavy pressure from floodwaters, and for £1,000 a hectare we're incentivising planting that woodland to try and firstly either slow flows, take land out of agricultural management if water runoff is excessive, and also intercept flows as well. The next additional contribution, close to settlements. So as it says on the tin, really, this is near to settlements which are over 2,000 inhabitants. Basically, for public health and also well-being, there's a real drive to try and plant more woodlands around our larger settlements to give improved access for people to go and enjoy woodlands. But also, as Joe mentioned, the benefits that woodland bring in terms of pollutant uptake, carbon dioxide uptake, where we have the island heat effect as a result of urban areas. By putting more trees into that local landscape, we should be bringing that temperature down at a sort of local scale. So this is quite a nice payment to try and incentivise that, and as quite often taken up by local authorities, as obviously their land is often around urban settlements. And the last additional contribution is our recreational access one. So this is trying to incentivise landowners to open up either part or all of their site for public to access year round. So it can be quite an undertaking, obviously allowing people out onto your site, but also it's the highest contributor under additional contribution of 3,700 a hectare. And again, this works particularly well for local authority and large public organisations such as the National Trust, if you're already allowing people out onto your site already. But we are seeing quite a few private landowners take this up as well, and particularly on part of their site, just to be able to give a bit of land back to local populations. Just pulled together a quick map example of how the nature recovery additional contribution works. So this is for the nature recovery. So existing woodland on this map are these small areas of sort of pale yellow with the contours on. The woodlands in the southern half of this map are all ancient woodlands, and therefore the land adjacent to them attracts a premium rate for nature recovery additional contribution of 3,300. So if your creation plot is within that purple land, that is the premium rate that you will get, as long as you meet the requirements, which I'll come on to in a second. The woodlands in the top half of this map, quite small and fragmented. They're not ancient woodlands, and therefore the land adjacent attracts the higher rate rather than the premium. And then once we get over typically 50 meters away from woodlands, then we're into this lower rate of 1,100. So if you then decide to take up that nature recovery additional contribution, we have a few requirements. So we require a minimum of 5 native species. We require a maximum of 20% non-native species. We require a minimum of 30% shrubs and small trees. And we try to target 10 to 20% of open space within our woodlands. And what the combination of these requirements do is provide the best sort of nature recovery habitat possible to obviously bring species back into our woodland. This isn't quite an additional contribution, but it is another payment that some sites are eligible for. So it was brought in last year. It's called a low sensitivity land payment. And if your site is within certain areas within England, then they're directly eligible for this payment, regardless of what sort of design you put together. So as it says on the tin, really, low sensitivity, it excludes areas which have higher levels of constraint and landscapes that are more sensitive to woodland creation. So this could be things like national landscapes, national parks, it could be historic features, it could be priority habitats, protected sites. All of these things push the sensitivity level up, and therefore would fall out of this. But where none of these constraints exist, it falls into low sensitivity, and we're able to incentivize payment in these areas because it's not going to fall foul of these constraints. And it's a bit hard to read this map as it's slightly small scale, but I'll come on to our mapping service in a moment, but you can pull up the map in front of you here, and if your land falls within the purple zone, essentially you are eligible for that low sensitivity land payment, which you apply for through UCO. Also linked to the low sensitivity land payment is the woodland creation fast track process. So again, with these schemes that are in low sensitivity areas, as they require sort of a lower level of consulting and working with stakeholders than higher sensitivity schemes, then they're a lot faster to process. And therefore the Forestry Commission have put forward an agreement that we will process schemes under this fast track as long as the applications are complete. We will fast track these within a 12-week working period. And then the final element of the UCO agreement is your annual maintenance payments. So these are £400 per hectare per year for all 15 years of your UCO agreement. So it supports the ongoing management of the site, both in terms of weed and grass control, bracken control. It also assists the agreement holder with things like tree replacements and capital item replacements that you might need to do. Essentially, once your capital items are in place at the start of the scheme, you can't then get more capital items further down the line. But the idea with the annual maintenance payment is it will help you to replace things like tree failures, which might happen within the 15 years of the grant period. What we typically see with woodland creation sites is there's a lot of maintenance needs to go in the first 3 to 5 years, particularly with grass and weed control, bramble control, bracken control. But then beyond that point, as your canopy starts to close, your trees establish, hopefully you will start to see this maintenance dropping off, and you'll be using less of that £400 a hectare then. But granted, you might need to do some capital item replacements a little bit further down the line. So a quick summary really of how UCO stacks up. So initially we have the private finance, which almost aside from UCO, but just through creating Woodland, you have then the potential for bringing in timber, wood fuel income in the future. As Joe mentioned earlier, we have carbon credits, which you can either store or sell. And we also have private finance available for other ecosystem services. The additional contributions are essentially a really nice top up to help you establish Woodland at the start of the scheme. You have the actual cost for things like infrastructure. You have the annual maintenance payments to cover the 15 years of the agreement. There's the capital costs, which can fund up to 10,200 hectare to support the tree planting activities. And if you're eligible, you also have the low sensitivity land payment. As mentioned a little bit earlier on, we have something called the Forestry Commission map browser on our website, so on .gov.uk, which thank you, Millie, for just popping the link in the chat. So if you go onto here, we have sort of two key areas really for UCO. So under targeting and scoring, we have the areas that are eligible for additional contributions. So you can toggle on, for instance, the flood risk map, and it will show you where in the UK you're eligible for UCO additional contribution for flood mitigation. We also have land sensitivity, and this can show firstly the low sensitivity land payment area, but it also shows other sensitivities, so you can pull up things like historic environment, priority habitats, to help inform what's in your local area and how the woodland will be designed. If you decide to go for a UCO application, as you're putting that together, there are links within that UCO as well to tell you where you need to find the information. Quite often it links through to this map browser. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of UCO. I'm now just going to go into Woodland Creation Planning Grant. If there's any questions, I imagine quite a few might have come in there, so I think we'll pick those up at the end. So UCO was let's say, the delivery side of Woodland Creation that the Forestry Commission offer. The Woodland Creation Planning Grant, as it says in the name really, it's all about planning your woodland ready to go forward for either funding or if you're self-financing, whichever way really. So it basically aims to assess the suitability of the land for woodland creation, and then assist with completing a whole UK forestry standard woodland design plan. So similar application requirements to UCO, but they are subtly different. So the land again must all be in England, but with planning grant, the land can still be an existing grant scheme, such as countryside stewardship. The idea being that you can plan your woodland whilst it's in a different payment mechanism, but once that comes to an end, you're ready to go forward for woodland creation. Once again, joint multi-landowner applications are welcomed, and we don't have a maximum area. You do not need to own or control the land with the planning grant, although obviously once you get to the point of view of planting, then you will need to have that sorted out. As with UCO, it supports a range of woodland types, so we work with conservation charities on management of nature reserves and doing woodland creation on those in a very sort of sensitive area. We work on rewilding schemes, and then we work right through to productive broadleaf and productive softwood schemes at large scale. So it really does fit all different types of woodland that you'd like to work with. Completion of the planning grant ensures that your creation project is UK forestry standard compliant. And a new addition to the planning grant is it also now includes the environmental impact assessment at the end of it. So once this has been completed, your project really is rubber stamped, ready to go, obviously assuming that you've then got control of the land and your finances are ready to go. Total funding for the planning grant is capped at £30,500, which I'll just touch on the next slide. The slight difference from UCO is that applications are a minimum of 5 hectares. There's typically planning grants are focused on the larger sites, then we don't take it down to a hectare like with UCO. There is no maximum. And again, the difference from UCO is that individual blocks are a minimum of 1/2 hectare. The minimum width is the same. So the sort of three areas of payment for the planning grant: stage one, which is a £1,500 payment. That pays for a desk-based research. We do tend to do a field-based site visit as well, but most of it is desk-based, and it identifies the real sort of opportunities and constraints in the landscape and on your site for woodland creation. Once stage one's completed, moving on to stage two, this is where we take forward the sort of the findings under stage one and form a design. So this is area-based, £150 a hectare, with a minimum of £500 for your smaller sites. And the third area of payment is supplementary payments. So these are additional payments for surveys that might be required to inform the woodland creation design plan. So there might, I'll come on to what the survey types are in a moment, but we fund up to 70% of the cost of these surveys. So, as mentioned, stage one, this identifies the opportunities and constraints on the land that will be taken forward to the woodland creation plan. Let's come on the wrong way around. So the main themes that are covered under the planning grant: firstly, we have biodiversity, typically species and habitats, and these can be both what is currently on the site and also what's important in the landscape. So we need to know what species are currently reliant on the site, and whether woodland will benefit or potentially harm those species and how they use the landscape. We can't always assume that woodland creation is going to benefit every species, as obviously your open habitat species are very sensitive to woodland creation. The second theme is landscape. So as mentioned earlier, we have national landscapes and national parks, and also other sort of undesignated landscapes which may be more sensitive to woodland creation. Equally, we might identify that certain landscapes are very open to woodland creation, and maybe we're able to have more creative designs within them. We look at water and how water flows through a landscape and what sort of quality the water is, and how woodland can either help or hinder that. Historic environment, we go into a little bit more detail than with UCO in terms of designing for particularly things like listed buildings and potentially like listed parklands and World Heritage sites, etc. So if you've got a greater constraint in your landscape from a historic point of view, planning grant is a good way to try and address that. Where needs to be, we bring in local stakeholders and expert advice to help inform what the creation design plan will be. We look at the protection of the woodland, both from deer, browsing animals, squirrels. And then the last one, which is key, and we always bundle them together, but actually very key elements on their own. We look at soil in the first instance. So what soils are on site, and quite often, surprisingly, soils can vary quite significantly even across a small site. And the soil type will then inform what trees and woodland type we're going to be planting. We then also look at the climate, both current and future. As Joe mentioned, we have a change in climate, and if we end up with drier or wetter or windier areas on your site, we have to also look at how that will impact the trees that are selected and grown. And lastly, we look at silviculture. So once the trees are in the ground, how will they be protected and managed to give the outcomes that the landowner wants, whether that be from a productive point of view or from a nature recovery point of view. At this stage as well, we also commission surveys to help inform any of these target areas. So there could be things like breeding bird surveys, Lepidoptera surveys, vegetation classification, historic environment, geophysical surveys, peat surveys, whatever's really needed to try and get the best information possible for that site to inform what the design will be is typically eligible under planning grant. So once you've pulled all that data together, we then start to pull together ideas of what the woodland design will look like. So the key output of the stage 2 is called the Woodland Creation Design Plan, WCDP. And the 5 sort of areas in this plan are the objectives. So that's the objective of predominantly the landowner, what they want to achieve on the site. There's a summary of what's happened under stage 1, essentially, what surveys have happened. We then take forward the concept development, which is where we bring those constraints and those opportunities that have been identified. We start to mash them up into the landscape map, and we develop the concept of what sort of woodland is appropriate for that site or for areas of the site. We then also bring in, if necessary, the stakeholder engagement to help inform and advise on what the woodland should look like based on that concept, to then develop a proposed planting plan to take forward to a final design. There's 3 key maps that are produced, which I'll show an example of in a second. We have the site appraisal map, which this appraises all of the constraints and opportunities on a site and sort of says where the no-go areas are for woodland creation, and also where woodland types might be best suited within the site. We then have the design concept plan, which is taking that a step forward to start designing your woodland. And then we have the final creation design plan, which includes your stocking densities, your tree species, your actual woodland types that are going to be used for the site. And at any stage of here, we can bring in Forestry Commission specialists and other wider stakeholders to help inform and advise on the creation design plan. And this can vary depending on your site and your objectives as to which specialists we need to bring in. This is an example of a landscape context plan. They don't always need to be that complex. Typically, we use OS layers underneath or master map layers. There are other apps out there as well, which are really useful nowadays in terms of putting together quite a quick woodland creation plan. It's nice and clear. On here, we see things like ancient semi-natural woodlands mapped, historic parkland, existing areas of productive conifer. And this kind of starts to show where the constraints are and where woodland are most appropriate. i.e., where we've got historic features, we should really be quite mindful of what woodland type is created around that. Moving on from the context plan, when we come on to the design concept plan. So this is the same site as the previous slide. As mentioned, we've got a historic feature in here. As a result of that, and this is just an example, but we've got wood pasture parkland around here to keep that nice open landscape to protect the views of this historic landmark. Where we've got less sensitive areas away from things like historic features, then we start to go into your closed canopy, productive woodlands. Moving on from this, we would then pull together your final design plan using these same compartment blocks of saying what are the actual species that are going to be planted in each of these blocks and what densities. So the summary of planning grant, step 1, it's a very simple application form and a map of your site boundary. You submit that to the planning grant team. We give a very quick assessment just to make sure that there's no real obvious reasons why we can't offer a grant on that site. And then we send that stage 1 offer out to you, and then you're free to start with stage 1. Both the applicant and the Forestry Commission undertake the desk checks, and we also do a site visit with you to start to put together stage 1 documents that you can then submit to us. Once that data is all submitted in and we've run through it and we start to get ideas about stage 2, we can proceed to stage 2. And this is where the applicant will develop the final design in conjunction with the Forestry Commission as well, wherever you need us. At the end of stage 2, the final design is then consulted on, and we undertake any necessary environmental impact assessment. Hopefully then your final plan is approved and you're ready to go forward to funding, whether that be UCO or other funding models or standalone investment. Which I think brings us nicely back onto Joe.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. That was a great overview of the two grants. So I just want to take us through some other funding options. We are grant agnostic, though we do have our own funding, grant funding. And it's really important to make sure with whatever planting you're considering that you get the right funding that's suitable for you or for your objectives. So we work with a lot of other partners in the Southwest, but also there's a lot of other partners our other regions and our other colleagues work with across the country. So some of the three sort of main other funding types that are available is the Forestry England Woodland Partnership Programme, Community Forests and Woodland Trust. There are also smaller pots of money throughout England as well that can help with tree planting, but these are sort of the sort of three main ones at the moment. So just to go into the little bit of the Forestry England Woodland Partnership Scheme, this is our kind of sister organisation under the Forestry Commission, and they have got their own grant scheme. This is an excellent grant. Well, it's not a grant, it's kind of a way to get trees into the ground if you want trees in the ground without any of the hassle. In essence, what you do is actually, if you want to plant trees, you've got an area you'd like to plant trees, which is over 20 hectares. You can lease that land over to the Forestry Commission and what Forestry England. And what the Forestry England will do is they will work out what trees will grow there. They will plant the trees. They will do the fencing, and they will manage those trees for the future. So what's in it for you? You'll get that income, but you'll also be able to receive any of the carbon credits that are generated from that woodland. And you don't have the hassle of being able to apply for grants, and you won't have the hassle of being able to project manage that woodland to establish those trees. So it works really well for some people. Other options, we work really closely with Community Forest. You may have come across them already. Three of the main community forests down here in the Southwest are Forest of Avon, Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest, and also Forest for Cornwall. So Forest for Avon and Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest have their own bespoke funding, which can be a really good way of getting trees into the ground and also getting advice. Forest for Cornwall cover the whole of Cornwall, and they will have advisors who will complete your applications free of charge. So really beneficial if you do live in Cornwall. Having said that, Forest of Avon and Plymouth and South Devon Community Forest, any tree planting that they do that's over half hectare, they will come to the Forestry Commission to ensure that it fulfills the EIA requirements to check that. So we work really closely with them, and we work in partnership with them just to make sure that we can get as many trees in the ground as possible. So I'm now going to hand over to Ellen, who's going to take us through the Woodland Trust funding options. Again, this is open to everybody in England, but Ellen will take us through it in a bit more detail. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Jo. Can you hear me okay? Is that all working?
You're good. You're good, loud and clear.
Great. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. My name's Ellen Smith. I'm an outreach advisor for the Woodland Trust. I'm here today to tell you a bit about our Woodland Trust offers, all of which are available across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And if you're particularly interested in anything I mentioned today, then your best options are either to email us on the email that's going to go into the chat or at the end of the slides with any inquiries, or if you're keen and it sounds good to you, then you can just go onto our website and get going straight away. And I'm going to talk through three of our sort of main offers. We have MOREwoods, which is for small woodland creation. We have MOREhedges, which is for our hedgerow offers. And then we have Trees for Your Farm, which is for agroforestry. So I will get going on these now. Starting off with the MOREwoods and MOREhedges. These are both funded by Lloyds Bank, but it's all coordinated and handled by us, so you'll only ever be working with us advisors at the Woodland Trust. So why might you consider these options over some of the other excellent options that have been outlined today? Well, they're really suitable for sort of smaller, small holdings, landowners, people who want to plant small areas of trees. The land doesn't need to be registered. The funding is available for non-agricultural land, and what's great is just there's minimum form filling, and it's a really quick decision. So I was conducting site visits in November of this year, and they're planting this season, so we can turn things around really quickly. And what's great is we kind of support you through the whole process. So from the second you kind of register your interest online, we'll guide you through the process, whether that be with a site visit, helping you decide the design, the densities, the species you'd like, but then also sort of procuring them and sending them to your door. So it's all handled sort of quickly and easily by us. And we have a sort of full network of consultants across the southwest, especially. So we don't reach capacity really. We have, if you register online and you suit the criteria, then we can push forward and help you plant small areas of trees or hedges and potentially agroforestry. So just a little bit more detail about our MOREwoods offer, our small woodland creation offer. So how does it work? Essentially, you go online to our website, which is in the chat. We ask for a little bit of information just about where your farm is and roughly what you'd like to do. And then we will send out a sort of an expert advisor, either one of our team or one of our consultants, and they'll help you draw up a plan. Again, doing helping you with all those background checks, those soil checks, the constraints. And once you come up with a plan, we'll put together a report, and then it's either up to you. You can either go through a self-planted option, and we fund 75% of the cost of the project if you're happy to plant the trees yourself, or if you'd like us to organise a contract planted agreement, then we will fund 60% of this, so you'll have to fund the other 40%, and this has a minimum of 1 hectare for the contract planted, but if you're going through the self plant, then it's only a minimum of 0.5 hectares or 500 trees. And it is very flexible. So whilst we, frame it as small woodlands, if you want to use these 500 trees to plant shelter belts or copses, we can talk about this and find a way to make it happen. So it is very flexible, and just to kind of emphasize that kind of ease of agreement, turning these around, in a month or two when needed. Now we'd be looking at visits, we'd be lining up planting for the next season. So starting in November, December of this year, as the season's pretty much over now. Moving on to our MOREhedges offer. So if you'd like to plant some hedgerows from a sort of biodiversity perspective, we fund 75% of hedges. We don't offer a contractor option, and we don't actually send out an advisor for this because it's a relatively straightforward offer, and it's all about connectivity really, so connecting hedgerows to existing or newly planted woodlands, and it's for a minimum of 100 metres up to 750. So we recognise that there are obviously countryside stewardship funding options available for hedges, but if you're wanting to just do a small stretch for sort of biodiversity perspective, then we can help you source all of these trees and get them to you quickly and easily. And in terms of the sort of hedgerow specification, so we always recommend a nice double row of hedgerow trees for a nice healthy dense hedge, planting at 5 hedging plants per metre, and then we also include some tree species there so that you can plant one every 6 metres and decide which of those you'd like to remain as a nice hedgerow tree. We also provide alongside, same as the MOREwoods, we provide the relevant tree protection, so spirals for shrubs and 1.2 metres for the trees. And this is kind of a standard species mix that we provide. So, you get your 50% hawthorn, which has the lovely flowers and fruits that you want on a hedge. And then we have a nice diverse mix, recognizing that diversity is key. And you can choose those trees that you'd like. So it's oak as a default, but if you wanted sort of any other tree species, beech or something that you'd like on your farm, then we can arrange that too. So those are two sort of main small woodland and hedgerow offers, both of which are funded through Lloyds. And then in terms of agroforestry, we have this great scheme, Trees for Your Farm, which is delivered through Sainsbury's project funding, but again is all organised by us. And actually, to get yourself going on down this funding stream, it's the same website and the same email address. So if you're not sure which one you fall into, again, just drop us an email. We can help take you down through the process. So a little bit more about Trees for Your Farm. So it is a competitive scheme. We do have certain requirements. We're looking for particularly innovative, sort of inspirational trees on your farm sort of designs, looking to kind of expand our knowledge and understanding of agroforestry systems and how they work on farms. But we will consider all types of commercial farms as long as you have an SBI number, and we'll consider all types of agroforestry planting. And one of the sort of key requirements so that we can continue this knowledge development is that we would look to potentially monitor the ecological and business outcomes of the planting on your farm. So it would be kind of looking to develop an ongoing relationship so that we can learn together about how it's worked. In terms of the trees that we can help you source for this, it's up to 100% funding for the trees, the protection and the fencing, but there are a certain number of requirements for you to achieve this. So we'll only source UK and Ireland sourced and grown trees from a sort of biosecurity perspective. This is quite important. We are also looking to kind of demonstrate the benefits of trees on farms. So we'd like them to kind of offer a number of environmental or farming services, such as shade for your livestock, water and soil management, etc. We can, under certain circumstances, also fund fruit and nut trees. There needs to be a minimum of 50% native trees in these designs, and it's sort of a case-by-case basis because we are limited in our funding, and we're sort of particularly interested in the sort of planting of native trees. So again, just worthwhile telling us a bit about what you'd like to do, and we can figure out if we can fund your farming design. The application process, as I said, is very similar to MOREwoods. You just submit where you are, what you'd like to do online. We'll send out an advisor, and then we put together reports. And also we'll be on hand to kind of support you with the ongoing maintenance advice and the ongoing management of those trees. So yeah, just to really emphasize that it's all of our kind of offers are designed to be quite easy to engage with, and where you're not planting large planting schemes that would be eligible for Forestry Commission funding, we can kind of pick up the other schemes that fall in between. And I just thought, just so you can kind of get an idea of what sort we might fund through a Trees for Your Farm, for example. This is a farm that's we're planting with this year in Cornwall. It's West Coombe's Farm down in East Cornwall. They have a dairy farm down there, and they're putting in these quite innovative alleys of trees in their grazing platform. So they're dividing their fields already with electric fencing, and they're wanting to plant some trees along these fence lines to create nice sheltered plots, because when they're in the centre of these fields and they can be quite exposed to sort of cold winds from the southwest and also from sun in hot weather. So they planted these tree alleys with standard rows of trees down the middle with oak and walnut and sweet chestnut, which will offer this nice long-term shade. And then on either side of these, they've planted these coppiceable browse lines with trees like willow and hazel, which the cows would like to browse on. and yeah, we're looking forward to seeing the benefits both to the livestock and the soils, and also bringing wildlife out into the field. So this is sort of an example of how a Trees for Your Farm scheme could look. We're very conscious that designs need to be right for you, so we work to make them bespoke to whatever farming situation you're in. So yeah, those are our main options. MOREwoods for small woodland creation, MOREhedges if you'd like to do some hedgerows for wildlife, and then Trees for Your Farm if you'd like to try an innovative agroforestry design. And yeah, those are the links to follow if you'd like more. And our plant email is a great first place to go if you're not sure which is the right one for you. And that's everything for me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Ellen. That was great to see what the Woodland Trust offer is. So we're nearly there before we move on to the Q&A sections. So we've taken you through the main grants that are available. So whether you are a landowner, a farmer, whether you're here as an agent or an advisor helping others to plant trees on their land, what the next steps might be for you. So it would be basically to consider what opportunities there are on the land, and also what objectives you want to achieve by planting those trees. So they're the two really important aspects to get right. You then need to make sure that you've got the right funding, type of funding to match the type of tree planting that you're doing. So that right tree in the right place for the right reasons, strapline. Have got our Southwest Woodland Creation mailbox there. We can triage you to the right funding if you provide us a little bit of detail. So we'll send around the slides after today. So just drop us a line and we will kind of get you, point you in the right direction for the right support. That's how you start. I'd also recommend signing up to our newsletter. We produce it once a month. It is very local. It's got very local flavour. It's got news from all our partners that we're working with, any national updates on the grants that are coming out as well. So it's really beneficial to sign up to that. And you can, when the slides come around, you can sign up directly from the slides. In the chat, because Millie's kindly put it into the chat, or the bottom of the signature. If you are outside of the Southwest, just let us know and we'll send you the right link so you can get signed up to the right newsletter. Also, well recommend, if you are really keen for tree planting, we are running 4 more webinars over the course of the next month. The next one is next Tuesday on the 4th of March, where we will be looking at deer and woodlands. They're all centred around a woodland creation. So the deer one is going to be looking at how to kind of manage, look out for signs of deer on your trees, because deer are one of the biggest threats to our existing woodlands and also newly established woodlands. So we want to make sure that you've got the right knowledge and equipped to deal with that. We also are running one on trees in the farm landscape. So considering where trees could go in your farm. We're also running a productive forestry webinar, how to create a productive forest. And that's not just conifer trees, that is also broadleaf productive forestry. Quite a big misconception that it just needs to be conifers. So we'll be tackling that issue, and then we'll be running a webinar on agroforestry. So there's been a lot of grant updates with agroforestry payments. We saw agroforestry payments under SFI come out in August, and next year we'll be having the agroforestry payments under a higher tier available come out early summer, as I am aware. So we'll be delving into that. All of the webinars, we will have experts delivering the content and also guest speakers. Millie's put the links to sign up to those webinars. So if you've not signed up for them, I'd well recommend that you signed up to them. Pass the links as well on to friends, neighbours, colleagues, if you think they would find it useful. So I shall move on. and I think we'll take a few questions. I think,
Thanks,
Becky, if I hand over to you to kind of coordinate for us.
Yeah, we've got a few questions spanning a few different topics around capital items, particularly fencing, what the overall caps are on those, some questions around the types of deer protection that we offer under UCO, as well as questions around joint applications. But I think we'll start with Mark's question in the chat. Is the limit on the amount of fencing grant you can claim determined on the overall cap? So I think Mark's question there is asking around the support for standard costs under the UCO agreement, and particularly if it's on smaller areas, and thinking, are there any specific requirements regarding what areas get fenced? For example, if the area of woodland creation is adjacent to existing block, can the fencing grant be, can the capital item be used for the larger block? Do you want to take that one, Jo, or I can come to Neil?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, happy to start. And then if I miss anything out, Neil, you can sort of jump in. So taking that last bit, so you might have some existing woodland already, and you're creating new woodland next to it, and your existing woodland's not fenced. There is funding under higher tier for existing woodland management where you can access deer fencing. There is also a standalone higher tier capital grant for deer fencing. So you can combine the two. So you get the deer fencing under the UCO for the new woodland, and then the deer fencing for the woodland management. So you'll just need to coordinate the two grants together. If you are thinking about doing that and going down that route, I would recommend getting in contact with your woodland officer, who will be overseeing both of your grants to work out what the best route is for that deer fencing. In terms of it's all about economies of scale, whether you select deer fencing or shelters. Kind of the ballpark figures, anything over 1 hectare, we'd recommend that you deer fence. If it's under 1 hectare, it's probably more economical to use tree shelters. However, having said that, you probably will need to use some kind of fencing, particularly if you have got livestock, because you will need to keep livestock out of that area initially, for the first sort of 15 years, so the livestock don't damage those trees. So you will need to use some type of fencing, whether it's your stock fencing or electric fencing, if you have got livestock there, or move the livestock out of the area. I think that's probably as much as I can think of. Neil, have you got anything else to add to that?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think just going back to Mark's question where it said about adjacent to existing woodland, then you're absolutely right. The UCO can only really fund fencing of the new block of woodland. We can sometimes allow a bit of flexibility if, for instance, you have 2 new UCO woodlands either side of an existing, and maybe there's a short stretch of fencing needed just to go through an existing woodland. We might be able to provide a bit of flexibility there, but the answer's usually no, because you can't fence an existing woodland under UCO.
I think it's probably worthwhile mentioning that usually funding was prohibited to woodlands, for existing woodlands, to anything over 3 hectares. That has now dropped to 0.5 of a hectare. So there's a lot of landowners, farmers out there who've got small woodlands who will now be able to access funding for woodland management. We're not covering woodland management per se today, but we can send you information about that. But if you just kind of put it into your internet search as well, I'm sure it will bring up some information.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Neil. And Mark, if you have any follow-up questions to that, please do put in the chat. I'll come now to a discussion that was happening in the Q&A around tree shelters. So I wondered if you could maybe, for everyone's benefit and maybe to save them reading through the comments, expand on what is eligible under UCO and what are the responsibilities of farmers and landowners using certain types of tree shelters.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to be involved or be part of sort of plastics. We're really, I have to say, as Forestry Commission, we're very conscious about plastics in the environment. And there is a lot of research going on currently, not just by forestry research, but other organisations. I think Woodland Trust, they're doing quite a lot of trials at the minute into non-plastic tree guards. From what I understand, sort of the latest information, we're not quite there. Something that's going to be long-lasting and effective protection against the tree guards. There were some initial trials with cardboard. Who thought of cardboard? They just didn't work. They collapsed as soon as they got wet. So at the point that I think that we get something that's sustainable, I think then the payments probably will be reviewed. It's not guaranteed. You can choose your own tree guards, select, but it is at your own risk. At the minute, we can't offer any assurances of that because of what the research and the evidence is showing to us. But there is money going into forestry research to find an alternative. We've got a great app now as well, it's worthwhile saying, to plot the plastic. So if you see tree guards out there that are redundant, have left, you can plot them on an app. And then there is hope that in time that if people have left their tree guards out, there'll be a movement to actually get this plastic off the land. Part of the grant agreements, the landowners and farmers have to dispose sustainably of the tree guards once they have been used. There are some great schemes though. Now Tubex have got a great recycling scheme as well for their shelters and guards.
Thanks, Joe. Neil, did you want to come in? And also, did you want to maybe say about the cost benefit analysis and actually how, you know, making sure the trees survive is also doing our bit for nature?
Yeah, I think the main point I was going to mention as well was about with the biodegradable tree guards. I mean, the best ones on the market now are looking really good, and you know they're sort of claiming a 5 to 7 year life guarantee, which with the early ones of those have gone in, and you know they are lasting for that length of time. If they do then biodegrade, then you haven't got that removal cost from on site, and having managed woodland creation sites where you're getting potentially a contractor or even volunteer time to come in and clean up potentially thousands of tree guards to then recycle. Yes, I appreciate the cost of a biodegradable shelter is higher, but you haven't then got that cost to remove afterwards. So on the lifespan of the whole project, you're probably sort of breaking even really. So completely agree with Placey's comments in there really. You know, we wish we could sort of support it a little bit harder, but we haven't been able to date, from just as Joe mentioned with that lifetime guarantee. But yeah, as Becca mentioned, sort of protecting those trees as well as possible. That's why we still think investing in plastic over not having a guard at all is beneficial, because getting the highest number of trees established on our site is the best thing for the woodland to establish within its grant period.
Just to add in from a Woodland Trust sort of perspective, we use plastic free on all of our estate. We don't use plastic, but on sort of other land owners' land, we do tend to still use plastic because we just can't guarantee the longevity of some of those plastic free tubes yet. And you know, it takes a lot of time and energy to plant all those trees, and if you have to go and then replace the guards after a couple of years, you don't want that to be happening. So yeah, we're similar sort of standpoint. We're investing a lot in research and design of these different options, but it's just not quite scalable yet to where we want it to be. But as you mentioned, the Tubex recyclable, the Tubex tubes are recyclable, which is a great backup.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll just be a matter of time before we get there with it.
Thank you. I hope that answers the questions. I'll move on now to a question about joint applications. So Darren has put, do multiple site applications need to be connected via the tree planting? So I'm guessing that's talking about if it's multiple landowners, does the woodland creation have to be joined up, as in adjacent, for them to be eligible for one grant application under UCO? Neil, did you want to take that?
I could take that one. So no, it doesn't have to be adjacent woodlands, and it doesn't have to be adjacent farms either. I think I haven't actually had an application that's come in over a really wide area, but we tend to think about it within one catchment or within one sort of defined area of landscape, that you could have multiple landowners. Once you're getting bigger than that, really, you probably should be looking at other grant schemes like landscape recovery or I suppose potentially with countryside stewardship. But yeah, just to answer the question more directly, no, it doesn't need to be connected woodland block, and it doesn't need to be adjacent farms.
Thanks, Neil. Could you maybe talk about some of the benefits of doing those joint applications for farmers and landowners?
Yeah, so one of the key things we find in the southwest in particular is obviously field size is quite small, and also the land that is sort of most sort of versatile and ready for woodland creation, it's often quite limited on one landowner, but the adjacent landowner might have a bit and the adjacent landowner might have a bit. And actually, if you're looking at a landscape scale, the best place to put woodland, more often than not, it overlaps multiple land ownerships. So that's where we're trying to really incentivize it, looking at where should woodland go in the landscape, and then looking at who owns it afterwards almost. There's obviously, from the point of view of getting contractors in and then future down the line with woodland management, if you've got more woodland within a block, it then reduces the price of the contractors for both planting and management. So by pooling your resources together, particularly for small landowners, it can be a real benefit.
I think it kind of speaks to something Joe mentioned earlier about economies of scale, and also maybe when you're thinking about even completing the UCO application form, that actually if you can pool your resources, you can look at employing a land agent to perhaps help you through that process as well. Joe, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, it might work out better for funding as well. So if your neighbour has got an ancient woodland and you can connect through your neighbour's land, the woodland onto your land, you'll then all be eligible for that higher premium payment of the additional contributions. So that's worthwhile considering too.
Okay, thank you. Just putting a shout out really to any more questions, because we answered quite a few in the chat around stackable contributions, so I don't think we need to spend too much time on that. If anybody has got anything else that they would like answering from Joe, Neil or Ellen, please do pop in the chat or the Q&A now, or raise a hand. Otherwise, we will be sharing our contact details post webinar, so if you think of anything, you can get in touch with us. And as we've mentioned before, we will have the recording available on YouTube, so please do feel free to rewatch that and maybe pass along to others that might be interested in funding opportunities. I think we do have a question. Hold on 1 second. Nathan asks, is there an online map that shows land and woodland types overlaid? Joe, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I would go to Magic Maps. It's probably the easiest one. So under habitats on Magic Maps, you can select woodland, and then there's something called the National Woodland Inventory, and that breaks it down to a lot of different categories of types of woodland. I think that dates back to 2022 is when it was last updated. So it's probably due for an update now. So yeah, Becca's, thankfully you've put it there. Neil, is it available on the Forestry map browser as well?
Yeah, yes, the woodland inventory is. And the other thing to select up is the ancient woodland layer as well. And also if you put the priority habitat layer on, that can sometimes show things like scrub, which may be coming towards woodland. So hopefully that's got to where Nathan's question was.
Yeah, thank you both. Thanks, Nathan. I'll do one last call out for any questions, give you a chance to type. Otherwise, I just want to say a massive thanks to Ellen for your section of the presentation. Really useful. We'll make sure we'll forward on your details to everybody that attended today as well. So hopefully they can get in touch with you, especially for anything regarding hedges. And yeah, Neil and Joe, special thanks to Joe for coordinating this and putting together the content, really appreciated. And yeah, thank you everybody for attending today and hope to speak to you very, very soon about your woodland creation projects. I don't think there's any other questions, so I think we'll bring the webinar to a close and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Becca. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.